little bits about me and the course outline, learning outcomes. So the differences between undergraduate and postgraduate study. I think the best way to address this is being able to answer a few questions that you probably have. First one, is it more difficult? Will you have to read more, know more? Will you have to contend yourself with more advanced theory? I would say overall it's not significantly more difficult, but it's mainly about depth. Yeah, exploring a topic or a theory and looking at its foundations, because you already have acquired quite a lot of knowledge in relation to your undergraduate studies, and you have chosen to specialize in a given avenue. For example, in psychology, there are lots of different disciplines. You've got, cognitive psychology, biological psychology, and again, each subject has its own specialities. So once you've finished your undergraduate degree, you probably thought, I'm really interested in this area or that area, and you've just decided to specialize more. Why am I doing it? Why have you decided to do a master's degree? Are you doing it because of pressure from your parents or simply to get an additional qualification for work? Yes, master's students do on average tend to earn a bit more than undergraduate students. But again, what is the real reason why you're wanting to do it? And finally, what is the biggest difference? So in relation to, is it more difficult? I would say it's all about depth. So there's no real major change in the difficulty, but you will explore theory in greater depth and will engage in more debates. So is it more difficult? Well, I said it's really about depth. I said there's no real change in difficulty, but why are you doing it? Well, you should be doing it because let's get a second here. You have a general interest and passion for what you are studying. Unfortunately, there are students that only do a master's for monetary value or social pressures, but the best students do it because they love their subject. And so you'll want to read more, you'll want to dig deeper into the theory and the content of what you perhaps covered in your undergraduate studies. So as I said, it's really about depth, digging deep into a subject and having the passion and general interest and curiosity of your subject. What would I say is the biggest difference? For me, again, I think lots of people would probably agree with me on this. I would say the biggest difference in doing a master's degree compared to an undergraduate degree is independence. So you've already learned a lot from your undergraduate studies. However, do you actually agree with the content? Do you actually agree with the theory? What are your views? What's your opinion? Being able to develop your own arguments. That's one of the major differences. So we'll cover later on actually something called Bloom's taxonomy, which is a model that is used to really highlight this, but we'll come to that in a little bit. Here are some other differences. Assessments. With most master courses, there will be changes to the assessments, and most of them will be essay-based. Again, that will change from module to module, but as I said earlier on, you will be expected to focus a lot more on writing. The reason why is, as I said before, independence is one of the key characteristics that differentiate, so maybe a master's student from an undergraduate student. So essays are a good way to find out, how you think, developing your own opinions. Because in an examination, yes, you might have, open book examinations where you have short essays, where you can express perhaps your own view. But exams really just test your memory and maybe your understanding. In essays, though, I can really see how you think and how you can develop your own position. So you will be expected to do much more essay writing. In my master's degree, I think, which lasted about a year, I think I had about 4 essays, each worth about 3,000 words, and then the final dissertation, which is the big one, which is anywhere between 10 and 30,000 words. But again, it varies from module to module. Contact with staff. I can assume that A lot of you in your undergraduate degree attended lectures where there might be 300 students or so. That might be the case for certain master's courses, maybe specifically business. But there will be certain times where you'll have more seminar based. So you'll sit around a table with the lecturer there or the professor, and you'll have much more of a discussion and a lot more sort of one-on-one contact with the staff. Again, when I did my master's degree, sometimes once we finished the seminar, we would even go to the pub, and actually have a further discussion there about what we learned earlier on. So you will have a lot more contact, and you'll be talking a lot more about your own views and being able to evaluate your own positions and analyze your own positions. So that's why I say engagement. So you'll be expected to participate a bit more in your master's degree and develop your independent learning. What is independent learning? Well, independent learning is, if I was to set you an essay topic, are you able to go away and do your research and construct your work with little help? You know what to do, you've had the experience of doing that. Now, of course, some of you may have different experiences with this. Some of you are very familiar with writing, some of you haven't written much at all for your undergraduate. Maybe it's more examination based. But lecturers will expect you to already have some academic skills, research and writing, because you've already done your undergraduate degree. However, over the next few weeks, I will be giving you some further tips and guidance on how to become more of an independent learner. And finally, being more critical. So you'll be prepared to really question a lot more of what you read, more evaluative work. And again, once you finish your master's degree, you might be considered a specialist in your area, because you've dug down to the foundations of theory and ideas, and you've discussed them in depth, and you've criticized them and evaluated, and you've written extensively on them. So you will be very knowledgeable of your subject once you've finished. So those are some of the major differences that you can be expected to see between an undergraduate and a master's degree. Now, to highlight this, I thought I might briefly mention something called Bloom's taxonomy. Now, Bloom's taxonomy is an educational model that is used to help visualize how somebody can gain mastery over a subject or an idea, but also it can be used to highlight some of the differences in sort of education. So one way I like to think about it is when you were doing maybe your A-levels or your secondary school, you were really learning how to crawl. When you're doing your undergraduate, you're learning how to walk. When you're doing your master's, you're learning how to run. And then if you go all the way to PhD, you're learning how to sprint. But some of the key differences between undergraduate and postgraduate can be highlighted here. So the lowest one, again, it's a hierarchy from 1 to 6. In your undergraduate studies, you were taught a lot of theory, and you were basically told, remember this theory. Memorize this person, memorize this idea, memorize this model. And you did cover quite a broad spectrum of different topics in relation to your specific subject area. And then what's happened? And you are tested on that. You're tested to see if you actually understand. Now, understanding is more advanced than remembering. I might know something and remember it, but do I actually understand the significance of that? Do I actually really understand the theory? When you go into your master's degree, though, because you bring with you to your master's study a lot of knowledge that you've gained in your undergraduate studies. But in your master's level, really you're doing a lot more application. So can you actually apply what you have learned to real world scenarios, things that are going on today? So, for example, the situation with COVID at the moment, can you apply sociological theory or economic theory to situations that are happening right now? Again, applying something, really, you can't apply until you've actually understood. So you'll be doing a lot more of that in your postgraduate study. That's what the PG stands for, postgraduate. Also, you'll be learning how to analyze. Now, analyzing something is really seeing how something is built. Yeah, so you'll be looking at the theory and you'll be thinking, well,
Max. Can you please unlock the meeting? I'm not able to join it with my other device.
come on, okay. Sarah, are you able to, the meeting isn't locked.
Hi, yes. I mean, I'm just looking now that I haven't locked the meeting. So you should be able to join.
Showing me here that the meeting has been locked by the host.
Meeting's been locked by the host.
Yep.
Okay. What? Okay. Let me see what I can do. And I'll try and get you in. Okay.
Aman, if you're still unable to get in, again, you will have access to this recording. And again, you can ask me questions via email if you want, Aman. Okay.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
So, as I was saying, yes, in your postgraduate study, you'll be doing a lot more applying and analyzing, checking the foundations, what, why, who, when, how. So, for example, in psychology, Sigmund Freud, perhaps the most famous psychologist, why did he develop his idea of, how the mind is structured? How did he go through that process? Who influenced him? And what did Freud influence later on? So you'll be looking really at how ideas are built. Seeing the foundations, like looking at a house, looking at how the bricks are laid and how the scaffolding is set up. So you're really looking in detail about how these ideas and concepts are formulated. After that, you've got evaluating. You'll be doing a lot of this in your master's degree. And evaluating, what does it mean to evaluate? Essentially, it means to, criticize or critique. What are the strengths and weaknesses? When we look at arguments, I think next week, we'll be looking at the idea that there's no such thing as a perfect argument. There are always cracks that you can find and expose and investigate. So really comparing, contrasting, seeing if everybody agrees with a theory, and if not, why not? But this is why I say you'll be engaged in a lot more debates, a lot more critical evaluation. And then finally, creating. So you'll be doing that roughly, at the end of your postgraduate studies when it comes to your dissertation, applying what you've learned and going out into the big bad world and doing some research. You might be doing interviews, you might be doing questionnaires, coming up with your own views, your own arguments. And a lot of the time when students finish their master's degree, their dissertation is used almost like a prototype to go into their PhD. And again, PhD is mainly about, pure creation and a lot of evaluation. So this is Bloom's taxonomy to hopefully make it a bit clearer about some of the big differences that you might find between, going from undergraduate into postgraduate study. At the top, you can see the in-text citation. And I put the link there at the bottom to the full reference, but we'll cover more of that in session 5. Again, nobody likes referencing, but it is absolutely essential for you to know how to do that. And we will cover that in session 5. So don't worry too much about that just yet. But I will provide useful links for you so that you'll be able to know how to reference perfectly. Okay, writing at postgraduate level. As I said, there is a substantial more amount of writing that you will do, really because it's, as I said, about independence, developing your own view, your own argument. Again, exams are not very good at being able to see your creativity. It's not really good at testing your creativity. It's mainly there to test your memory. And that is important. But again, to become a master of a subject, it's really, as I said, independence. So how to express your ideas in writing. That's why there's a lot more focus of that in postgraduate level. When it comes to writing, there are some tips that I'd like to highlight. So first thing about effective writing, and some of these might be quite familiar with you, some of them might be quite new because some of you have different experience with writing. One of the things I teach my students is good academic writing is formal. What is formal? Well, formal, again, means sort of rule-bound. Formal can also mean smart in terms of like dress, but formal really means rule-bound. So you should try and be objective in your writing. Try and avoid the first-person narrative, things like I, me, and my. Try and avoid emotional adjectives. Those would be things like happy, funny, exciting. So try and keep your writing objective. What does the word objective mean? One way I like to think about objective is universal. So if I say, well, this is a table in front of me, that's an objective statement because we'd probably all agree on that. If I start saying, well, this is a nice table or this is a good table, you're moving much more into the realm of subjective writing, maybe reflective reports, which some of you might be familiar with. But again, you should try and be as objective as possible because you are writing for a wide audience. In order for your writing to sound more acceptable or reasonable, you should try and aim it to be more objective. So avoid the first person narrative. That will include things like I, me, my. I would also suggest you try and avoid the second person narrative, you or your. Sometimes when students write, you could be doing this, I sort of think, well, you're speaking to me directly. So try and keep it, as I said, in the third person. So instead of saying, in my opinion, in your essay, just say the essay will argue, or the document supports. That's writing in the third person. Avoid emotional adjectives as they are ambiguous. What does the word ambiguous mean? Well, ambiguous essentially means vague. It's not clear. It can have many different interpretations. I had a student once, and in the essay, the student said, the government does not do this because it makes people crazy. Well, what do you mean by the word crazy? Not only is that informal, but the word crazy has multiple different meanings. I mean, do you mean crazy as in angry? Do you mean crazy as in insane? Crazy as in schizophrenic? I mean, it has lots of different interpretations. So again, just be very, very careful of the emotional adjectives because they're highly subjective. Try not to use contractions either. So don't say things like don't, wouldn't, couldn't. You'd say like do not, would not, could not, etc., etc. So try and keep your writing, as I said, formal. Next thing, make sure that your writing is consistent. What do I mean by consistency? Well, consistency means persistency, making sure that what you say at an earlier stage in your essay matches what you say at a later stage. You don't want the reader to sort of get confused, and you don't want your writing to be moving from point to point haphazardly, sort of all over the place. There should be a sort of good logical flow behind it. And you can develop methods in order to help you write more consistently by, maybe doing a flow chart, thinking about how you're going to structure your paragraph. We'll actually look at that at a later stage, some tips on how to write paragraphs, like statement, evidence, explanation, and being able to sort of guide the reader through your essay, almost like a story. But again, it's an argumentative story. So making sure that your writing is consistent. So ensure that what you state in one place matches what you say at another. Be careful on what I term absolute terms that indicate 100%. There are words like all, will, never, impossible, always. I'm not saying you can't use them, but if you do, just be very, very careful, because all it takes for me to do is find one exception and then your argument is inconsistent. And again, what you're doing then is you're setting up your essay in a very rigid fashion. So it can be quite strong, but it can snap very easily. So it can be considered maybe brittle. So just be very, very careful of those terms. And you can use them, but just be very wary. Always double check and proofread your work. One of the first things that lecturers will do is look at the general structure. One tip I can give you when you're double checking your work and proofreading is don't read it in your head. Read your work out loud. Trust me, there's a big difference, because when you're reading your work, you'd be thinking, oh, well, that doesn't sound right. you know, when you're speaking it, verbalizing your essay. So that doesn't sound right. Well, it doesn't sound right probably because there's either grammatical errors or because there's some inconsistency. It doesn't really make sense. Check to see if the argument actually adds up logically. If it does not, you've actually committed a fallacy. And remember, fallacies earlier on I was saying is an error made in an argument. Again, they can be used deliberately, but they can also be accidental. And the fallacy there is what we call a non sequitur. We'll cover these at another date, but essentially is where the conclusion does not follow from what you've been saying before. So an example of an argument that adds up logically would be something like, all pigs can fly, Jim is a pig, conclusion, therefore Jim can fly. Okay, now that's logically valid, but it's poor in content. We'll look at the structure of arguments another day, but that's something where, you know, the structure follows the logic. You know, all X's are Y, Y is a Z, etc., etc. But an example of a non sequitur would be, all pigs can fly, Jim is a pig, therefore Jim is a dog. That would be a non sequitur. A bit of a silly example, but that's making sure that you fulfill all the structural elements there. But we'll cover that in greater detail another day. Remember, depth, not breadth. Yeah, you're digging deep into a theory. Yeah, looking at maybe how the idea started. You know, what's the history of that theory? Who is the person that generated that theory? Are they biased? You know, are they? Do they have any difficulty constructing it? So you're really looking at the foundations of ideas rather than just scraping the surface. You don't want your idea to be. You don't want your writing to be what we call superficial. You know, just scraping the surface. You really need to dig deep into a topic. So you can explore and analyze theory and evaluate it by really examining its essential foundations there. Finally, using good sources. Now, what's really, really important when it comes to references is being able to find, you know, valuable pieces of information or information that you can be considered very trustworthy. Where do you guys go for information about the world? Where do you go for news? Do you use The Guardian? Do you use BBC? Do you use Washington Post, Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, Daily Mail? Or do you use much more reputable news organizations, original fact reporting, things like Reuters or Associated Press? One of the problems with using, you know, tabloid newspapers or broadsheets even, like The Guardian or Daily Mail or The Sun, one of the biggest problems is that they are extremely biased. Yeah? So they may only write about topics in a certain way, and they may twist facts in order to support a given political narrative, which is usually their bias. Things like Reuters, though, and as I said, as Associated Press, that's original fact reporting. So they won't say if something's good or bad. They'll basically just say, this is what's happening, make your own mind up. Yeah? They won't try and provide a sort of opinion behind it. When you were doing your undergraduate studies, you may have been allowed every now and again to include some sources that are somewhat questionable. As I said, newspapers, independent websites, blogs. But at master's level, you'll be expected to use really high quality sources, journals, textbooks, seminal works. What are seminal works? Seminal works are essentially highly influential works. For example, Darwin's Origin of Species, or Newton's Principia Mathematica, or Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. These are books that may have been published hundreds or even sometimes thousands of years ago, but they are still read today because they are so influential. Those are seminal works. Seminal works are they're not only books, they're not only essays, they can also be pieces of art, like the Mona Lisa by Da Vinci. That is a seminal work, a very influential, very famous piece of art. At the end, I've put, you know, try and be eclectic. Now, what does the word eclectic mean? Eclectic means that you know, or if you're an eclectic thinker, sorry, you know a lot about different disciplines. So you are well versed and you have a good amount of knowledge about science, literature, psychology, sociology, economics, business. You're a very, very well-rounded thinker. Now you might be thinking, well, Max, didn't you mention before it should be depth, not breadth? So why should I be eclectic? Well, if you dig deep enough into a topic, you'll find that they can be linked with lots of other disciplines. They can be linked with economic theory, business theory, psychological theory. And what you might want to try and do is synthesize, combine, economic theory with social theory to try and make your work very, very colorful and very original. And what you'll find as well is that actually it can make your work a lot more difficult to criticize if you are eclectic in that approach. So as I said, yes, using good sources is really essential. And we'll look at that next week on finding the best quality evidence for your essays and for your writing in the future.